the second lecture, is on the idea of explanatory critique. Okay, I've already should write this on the idea of explanatory critique. Okay, where what I'm trying to do is extending the contours of explanatory critique, right? Surely one kind of extension of interpretive understanding was there in my first lecture, okay? Because in specifying the limits, one was also moving beyond, right? Etc. In this exercise also, okay? Now, I think underlying the remarks that I'm going to make in this lecture is also ways by which causality as a question, because some people may say our earlier lecture was all on meanings, right? Surely there is also the language of cause that social science must address over and above the question of meaning, right? Now, my lecture, the second lecture, is addressing the question of causality. Okay, but again, as I said, I wish I had more time with you all, then I could perhaps go into different theories of causality and so on. So I have, as I said, I'm just coming here for a day and then kind of hitting out at you and then running away from here, right? With fond memories, of course. Okay. So how do we think about revitalizing causality? Okay. So what I'm presenting is an attempt to revisit the language of causality, but I'm sorry I won't be going into the history of the language of causality, but how do we revitalize? Okay, revitalize causality. So if my first lecture was on meaning, the second lecture is about cause, right? But not the history of the concept of cause, okay, but perhaps a rather truncated description of cause, working off, in that sense, not setting the limits of earlier explanations of cause, but trying to work with contemporary meanings. And that's why I want to start this lecture with a long quotation from an interesting social scientist, Andrew Sayre. Okay, and here's a book called Method in Social Science, a Realist Approach. Okay, a realist approach. Method in Social Science, a Realist Approach. In fact, that book was written some years ago, but it came through a second edition sometime in 2010, right? So it's a fairly updated book, although it was written much earlier. Okay, now, and I want to quote from Andrew Sayre, and I'm going to read it out to you, okay? And he talks about the question of cause in social science, right? And he says, and I'm quoting, "To ask for the cause of something is to ask what makes it happen." Okay, to ask for the cause of something is to ask what makes it happen. I sound like a poet, no? So reading out a poem or something like that. No. So I should kind of disabuse myself of all these hangovers that I have, right? So to ask for the cause of something is to ask what makes it happen, what produces, what generates, what creates or determines it, or more weakly, what enables or leads to it, right? So to ask for the cause of something, okay, is to understand what enables something, okay, or what leads to something, right? That's what he's saying. And I'm continuing the quote. "As soon as you reflect upon such words, which are all associated with cause," the word cause is associated with make it happen, produces, generates, creates, determines, okay, enables, leads to it, and so on. Okay, now, as soon as we reflect upon such words, it becomes clear that they are metaphors. Okay, these are metaphors they're not quite, and as he puts it in brackets, not quite dead ones at that, because metaphors are always, metaphors are metaphors, so, okay, but he says, no, these are not quite dead words that we all associate with the language of cause, okay, which, so as soon as we reflect upon such words, it becomes clear that they are metaphors which allude to or summarize an enormous variety of means, okay, by which change can occur, right? So when you're talking of cause, you're talking about a range of words which has to do with, producing something or making something happen, right? Change can occur. There are many means in which change can occur. More, and I'm quoting again, and this is a useful quote, and you will understand why I'm pinning on this quote, right? More specific references to causal processes are given, okay, in the transitive verbs we use in everyday life, he says, right? And in many social scientific accounts, transitive verbs, okay, like they built the house, right? They built the house, okay, something. The house was created out of something, or restructured the industry, right? Restructured the state, right? Restructured the factory, okay? Or enclosed the commons, okay, etc. Okay, are simple causal descriptions. These are simple causal descriptions, that is, accounts of what produced change. Right? Okay, like any description, they can, of course, be unpacked. If these are simple causal descriptions, each description, what does it mean to restructure something? What does it mean to build something? Right? What does it mean to enclose something? Right? So you can unpack them and replace my more detailed accounts. You can replace it to my more detailed accounts, and these in turn may also use transitive verbs. Okay? As explanations, please look, you're now moving beyond descriptions. As explanations, these informal kinds of causal accounts are characteristically incomplete, Andrew Sayers says. That, okay, as descriptions they are fairly complete, but as explanations, they are fairly incomplete, okay, are characteristically incomplete. But for dealing with more mundane processes, they may be quite adequate. These descriptions may be enough, right, etc. These descriptions may be enough if you want to do certain kinds of acts in social science or in description. But if you want to explain, okay, then you have to go beyond. Okay, so one would certainly be hard pushed to say much about society without using them. So in fact, as he concludes this quotation, in order to clarify the nature and limitations of these and other types of causal descriptions, okay, and explanation, it is now necessary to proceed in a more philosophical discussion, right? This quote gives me the philosophy and also the justification to kind of do the kind of exercise that I want to do with you in this lecture. Okay. Now, in other words, if the, I will come to the question of explanatory critique a little later, but as I said, this attempt to engage with explanatory critique is revisiting the language of causality and to revitalize the concept of cause in social science, right? So the earlier lecture was about meaning and sounding the limits of the focus on meaning, and you can do some productive discourses there. But if somebody is more interested in the concept of cause, then possibly what are the kind of moves we can be making? So it's part of the attempt to revitalize causality, right? And that's the reason why I was making that quotation. Okay. Now, how do we revitalize this language of causality, right? And what I will first do is before I go into revitalizing this language of causality, and I will use certain concepts there, right? I want to, what is the inspiration for my remarks? Andrew Sayer, yes, but the title, it says a realist approach, right? Now there is in social science a school called as critical realism, right? There is in fact, one of the most important spokespersons for critical realism is, he's actually has a very Indian name, but he's actually, he passed away some years ago, a British national, Roy Bhaskar. Okay? Critical realism, right? So to understand the kind of remarks that I'm making, it's important to give you a sense of what critical realism is all about. So it's just, purely fortuitous that he should have asked the question about constructivism, and then I actually reminded, the audience that, look, constructivism is ultimately about forms of realism, right? Okay. So I'm not going to go into the detailed exposition of critical realism, but let me give you a small flavor of what critical realism is all about and why it poses an interesting challenge to our ways or our search for revitalizing causality, the question of cause. Okay. Now, one of the things that Roy Bhaskar does, okay, one of the things that Roy Bhaskar emphasized is that we should guard in social science or in doing science, right? Humanistically inspired science or outside of humanities inspired social science, you should guard against, okay, imposition of philosophical schema, okay, on reality, right? You should not thrust your categories on reality. You should not thrust your categories which may be subjectivist or subjectivist. Philosophical categories should not be thrust upon reality first, and which is again a claim that all of us make often. And the second, he makes the point that you should not confuse, okay, or conflate the knowledge of reality with reality itself, right? Okay, so knowledge of reality is one thing, reality itself is another thing, right? So you should not conflate the two. Please note, this is another variation on the conflation that I was telling you all about explanandum and explanans. What is to be explained and what is doing the explaining, right? This is another variant of that same confusion that we should avoid, right? Etc. Now, particularly with reference to this idea of not confusing knowledge of reality with reality itself, okay, Roy Bhaskar says to do so, to confuse the knowledge of reality with reality itself, is what he calls, and I'm just giving you certain terminologies, right? So I'm not trying to overwhelm you with ideas. I'm just giving you certain terminologies, and when you go back to your circumstances, you can do whatever you want with them, right? Confuse students further with them, or clarify the world better through them, right? Surely I'm not trying to confuse you, right? But epistemic, he says this is an epistemic fallacy, right? To confuse reality with knowledge of reality being confused with reality itself is an epistemic fallacy, okay? And that social science, in the critical realist mode, must avoid this epistemic fallacy, okay? Okay, surely we are all producing knowledge about reality, right? But it's quite possible that our knowledge about reality is falling short of reality itself, right? So I think you keep your discourse open consequently, right? Of course, please note, we are not discounting this knowledge of reality, right? Nobody is discounting the activity of gaining knowledge of reality, but only saying that we should the knowledge of reality with reality itself. This confusing the knowledge of reality with reality itself is what Bhaskar would call, and in this writing he has given effect to it most effectively, called the epistemic fallacy. Okay. Now we should avoid that. Okay. In other words, critical realism, according to Bhaskar, okay, rests on the separateness of the world and the knowledge we have of the world. Right? There is a world and our knowledge of the world. These are two separate things. Of course, they should meet. Okay? It's not inevitable that they will meet. There are circumstances in which they meet, situations in which they meet, and situations in which they divide, etc. If students today find us living in a world of our own, perhaps they are criticizing us for our epistemic fallacy, that perhaps no, this is something that I've been arguing for in our campuses, particularly on our campus on University of Hyderabad. Some years ago we experimented with what is called, it continues, the experiment continues, it's still an experiment, integrated MA. So we have students coming after +2 onto university campuses, right? Onto a university campus. There are a lot of students from Kerala who come out there, right? So you have a much younger demography on our campus. Otherwise, we always used to have students after 21, etc. Now we have 18-year-olds coming onto our campus, right? So, given that it's a central university, we have a campus which is already heterogeneous with social, cultural, caste, class, religion differences. Now you add to this younger demography. You really have, the university was of course stunned in the initial years about how to handle these young fellows. It's still reeling under the impact of all of that. But the point is that, this epistemic fallacy is something that we need, that operates not only at the level of social scientists to knowledge, right? Etc. Okay. That's why there is an ontological position. And this is something that students say, okay, how can you have a methodology class without bringing these words epistemology and ontology, right? So, and so on, right? But please note, it's a real credit that I'm speaking at it towards, after a few hours of talking, I didn't start with epistemology and ontology, right? So I think I need to be given some credit that I have resisted the language. No, but then there is, we know if you make this separation between knowledge of reality and reality itself, right? The world and our knowledge of the world, right? Is that, in other words, what Bhaskar is saying is that critical realism works off an ontological standpoint. Okay, it takes an ontological standpoint that focuses on an independently existing reality. That's why constructionism is a problematic, in the ways in the crude form is problematic because it in a sense reduces everything to our knowledge of the world, right? Etc. Okay. So if constructivism translates into an ontology, then it is perhaps interesting, right? But most of the time, constructivism is formulated as an epistemological position, a knowledge about the world. The best way to clarify the idea about epistemology, ontology, what there is. What there is.
Ontology is an answer to the question of existence, what there is. If you're trying to answer the question what there is, you're answering the ontological question. But then you can't answer that question independently of the question, how do I know? That's the epistemological question. Of course, Marx and others added another layer to that questioning. We can keep that aside, right? So, critical realism as a standpoint, by insisting on the separation between reality and knowledge of reality, world and knowledge of the world, takes an unabashedly ontological standpoint that focuses on an independently existing reality which knowledge and action tries to comprehend, right? So knowledge is directed at reality, knowledge is trying to get a measure of reality, okay? Bhaskar uses technical terms for it. He calls this independently existing reality intransitive realm, right? Now, I don't want to get into the technicalities of it, because as I said, you can read if you want. But please be a little careful, because it's a huge, critical realism is a huge enterprise. What started as a position in philosophy of science has actually translated into a huge enterprise, extending to every realm of human existence, including thinking about God, right? Thinking about philosophy in the East, philosophy in the West, etc. Differences between philosophy in the East and philosophy in the West, even to the question of God. Etc. So it's a huge enterprise, but I think let's avoid that. For your own information, I'm saying that this independently existing reality he calls an intransitive realm. Reality is independent of our descriptions, whereas our descriptions, our knowledge is transitive, right? Okay. So he makes a contrast between knowledge of reality, which is transitive, it belongs to the transitive realm, and reality, which belongs to the intransitive realm, right? Okay? Please note, intransitive does not mean that it is unchanging, right? Surely it is changing, okay? But our knowledge, is getting the measure of those changes, okay? Now there are other implications. The separateness of these two realms, the transitive and the intransitive, or reality and our knowledge of reality, the separation of these two realms means that there is no direct correspondence, okay, between knowledge, okay, and its object, reality. Knowledge, object of knowledge is reality, to get the understanding of the world. So once you say that these are two separate realms, okay, then there is no direct correspondence between thought, okay, and its object, or there is no direct correspondence between the intransitive realm, the object, reality, and the transitive realm, knowledge, thought, and so on. Okay. In other words, if there is no direct correspondence, then what is there? What is the relation between the two? Okay. And thought, knowledge. Okay. In other words, there is an insistence within critical realism on the social character of knowledge. Right? Somebody can read construction here. Somebody can read echoes of constructivism in this idea that knowledge is socially mediated, right? That there is a social character to knowledge, right? But as I said, that's a more, surely knowledge doesn't come from anywhere. It springs from actors, and actors are embedded in the world. So surely there is some embedding, the implications of embedding on the knowledge that they have, and so on. Okay. So you find that the challenge for social science, okay, is to understand with this layers of complexity, right? And if its tools of if the question of cause is to be addressed, okay, then it has to be addressed in the context of this ontological standpoint, which argues that reality is and knowledge about reality are two separate realms, and that there is a socially mediated character to knowledge. Now, let me with this background, and please note I've given you just a small background to critical realism, but if you get interested, you can read, but be careful, as I've already kind of sounded a cautionary note, right? Now, if we want to bring this critical realist language into causality, into our attempts to engage with cause, then there is some kind of concepts that we need to engage with. And please note, I'm now going to the second part of my lecture, okay, which is how do we think about concepts like structure, right? Tendency, mechanism, power. Use a concept like power, relation, etc. Surely you're going beyond meaning when you talk of structure, when you talk of power, when you talk of mechanism, when you talk of tendency, right? You're bringing something more than just meaning. And Taylor has told us that interpretive social science will also, have to work with meanings, but meanings cannot be reduced to the interpretive overlays of actors, right, etc. Okay, so there must be something other that you need to contend with, which Taylor himself doesn't engage with. And that's why my second lecture is trying to invoke certain other critical resources from other traditions, okay, which hermeneutics itself is not able to supply, right, etc. So let me put these categories to work, right? Categories like, this is writing under erasure, so everything is not erased, it's still there. I mean, like in deconstruction, etc. I just said, no, writing under erasure, so it's something like that. So somebody can see layers of meaning into these words. Okay, I'm being playful for its own sake. So now let us look at these categories like structures, okay, powers, okay, relations, okay, tendencies, okay, etc. You might ask, oh, what is this etc., right? In fact, Derrida has a wonderful essay called On etc. What do scholars mean when they write etc., right? I mean, does it include everything or something else? But anyway, let's keep that puzzle. Okay. Now, I'm saying we need to invest in these categories as part of a critical realist engagement to revitalize our notions of causality, right? Okay. Now, the first statement I will make, or the first clarification I will do here, is that any entity, okay, possesses a structure. Any entity, any phenomenon possesses an intrinsic structure or a combination of structures. Okay? I mean, it is these structures which make it the kind of thing it is. Right? I'll give you examples, but just let me formulate and then I'll give you examples. Right? Okay? I mean, it is these structures or combination of structures which makes any entity the kind of thing it is and not another thing. Right? Okay? Now, structures. So every entity has a structure or a combination of structures. And it is these structures, okay, which endorse that entity with dispositions, okay, with capacities, okay, with dispositions, with capacities, okay, with potential, with ability, okay, abilities and so on, right? Okay, now, so in other words, structures endorse the entity with powers to do something, right? Okay, anything exists, it has a structure, and it is that structure which gives that entity a certain capacity, right? A certain ability to do something, right? The power to do something, okay? And I want to introduce, please note, why am I introducing these categories? To revisit our language of causality. Of course, the older language of causality through law, etc., is no longer robust. But I can't go into the history of causality. That's why I said I'm looking at the more critical language of causality, independent of the history that is there, right? Now power may be, I want to bring, power may be exercised, powers may be exercised, or they may be possessed, powers may be possessed, they may be exercised, okay, and they can be actualized, okay, and they can be actualized, right? Okay, now what does it mean to say? So you can't think about power or powers independent of structures, right? Structures is what makes an entity. I'll give you the examples soon. I'll just let me enable the formulation, etc. Now, a power is possessed. Now, when you say power can be possessed, it can be exercised, it can be actualized. What do you mean, right? Power is possessed by an entity in virtue of its intrinsic structure, right? So there is some. I possess power given the kind of entity I am, right? So any entity which has a structure possesses power, right? Okay, and the power endures. The power endures whether or not it is exercised or actualized. It's possessed, right? Okay. Now, for instance, for example, okay. Look at a structure of a bicycle. I'm giving the example now. A structure of a bicycle, it has wheels, right? It has a frame, okay? It has a seat, a saddle, okay? It has also a handlebar, right? That's the structure of a cycle. Of course, nowadays you have, inventing the cycle in different ways, but that's the basic structure of the cycle. And all these structures are combined to form the bicycle, right? Okay. Now this entity called the bicycle possesses, I'm using the word, possesses the power to facilitate transportation. You can move from one place to another. It possesses the power, right? Okay. Now, please note, this power is there in the cycle whether you use it or not.
It's there.
It's there, it possesses. That's what I mean by possessing, right? No, I also thought this is useful to invest in these because, one of the language words of social science is power. Power, and we use this, we actually, what does it mean? When you say power is the capacity to determine somebody else, what does it mean to say that? What does it mean to say that A has power over B when B does things which A mandates, right, etc. What does it mean? There are so many. So I think this level of disaggregation makes it, our explanatory exercise becomes also a descriptive exercise. You become descriptively lucid and also explanatorily challenging. That is the task for social science, right? That's why it's distinctions. So whether you use the cycle or not, the fact that the cycle can be used for transportation means that it possesses power, right? Okay, so it's almost transfactual, right? I mean, you don't need to use it to know that it has power, right? Etc. It may remain locked in your shed and still possesses power, okay? But then, what is power exercised? What is power exercised? Now, a power exercised, okay, is a power that has been triggered, okay? And it's a power exercised is a power that is generating an effect in the system. Okay, power exercised is something that is bringing about a change in the system. Okay, I mean, for instance, one can exercise power by bringing the cycle out of the shed and using it. Right? It possesses power, but now you are actually exercising the power that is there in that possession. I bring it out of the shed and then cycle. Okay, and I sit on it. Okay, and you're triggering its power. You're exercising its power. Okay. Now, but then somebody might argue that I'm under the consumption of alcohol. Right, or I'm, you know, there are strong winds, strong headwinds on the path of the cycle, etc. Or there is a steep gradient. Then the exercise of power is restricted. Right? I mean, you know, I mean, in fact, the bringing out of the cycle to exercise its power is factually constrained, because I may not be in a state where I can ride the bicycle, because I might be, you know, sick or drunk or whatever that is, or there may be strong winds, etc., or the path is a steep gradient and so on. Okay, okay. Now, so you find that the exercise of power of the bicycle is circumcised by, constrained by other powers. Right? Okay. Interference from other exercise powers like the headwind or the gradient and so on. And the third, a power actualized. Right? A power actualized is an exercised power generating effects. Okay? Okay? Generating effects. The exercise power is also generating effects, but it is constrained by other things. Whereas the actualized power, okay, is the power to generate effects in an open system, and it is not counteracted by other forces. Right? In the second one, it is counteracted, the exercise of power is counteracted by other forces. Whereas actualized power is real power that is exercised independent, okay, of. That's why whenever students, nowadays students also are looking for fashionable name, Agamben, right? So Agamben is an important name. And how does Agamben define power? The power is the ability to decide the exception, which is true, okay? To say that no, this is not under the rule, the ability to decide the exception. Okay, but please note that is only actualized power. Okay, surely there is more to power than just actualized power. There is possession, there is exercise, there is act. No, some people may say that no, we are only interested in actualized power. Right? Maybe that's an important result to be interested in, right? But surely these are also equally important and interesting to engage with. And that's where I think social science, language, by revisiting the concept of cause, gets into a more robust language. That's why I call it revitalizing causality, right? Okay, now, a person, to stay with my example, a person may actualize the exercised power of the bicycle by moving from position A to position B. I want to go somewhere and I reach that destination. That is actualized power. Okay, etc. Now, So what I'm saying is, I've given you some initial clarity about two concepts like structure and power, right? There are also other words, I mean, that is figured. For instance, incidentally, the question of relations are also involved here, because when you're saying that the exercise of power is dependent upon other powers that may counter is affected, some other parts also get affected or take on the role of those other parts, etc. in any system. Okay. Now, likewise, we need to look at another concept of tendencies and mechanisms. Okay. Tendencies and mechanisms, right? In fact, one of the leading advocates of realism in economics, I mean, because there are, so what I'm saying is not just, please note, a humanities-centered social science. I mean, there is this wonderful work of Tony Lawson, right, who's an economist, okay, who invests in a lot of critical language, critical realism to reinvigorate the language of economics, right? Tony. Now, I'm only making this point because there are economists in this body, right? Okay. Now, and most of us, you know, social scientists always either we grudge the economists, or you know, we grudge them, or we are envious of them. I mean, you know, the kind of uncertainties that characterize other social sciences, economists don't have those uncertainties. Economics, you know, and the place for economics, I mean, you may have many social science departments closed down, but economics may not get closed down. Okay. Please note, I'm not saying this as a satirical comment. I think there is something real about economics, therefore, right? And that we social scientists also need to be getting real, like economists do, right? And that's the lesson I take, at least from interacting with economists and so on, right? Okay. So in fact, once you open out to other categories like tendencies, mechanisms, okay, then, for instance, a mechanism, like Tony Lawson in economics argues, that a mechanism, okay, is basically the way of acting or working of a structured thing. Okay, how something which is structured acts. So, and the economy's mechanism, the mechanism of capitalism, right? It's also a tendency. Please note, when a structure acts in a particular way, it also has a tendency to act in that way, right? I mean, when Marx discovered the laws of capitalism, quote unquote, the laws of capitalism, I mean, his theory about, say, the labor theory of value, etc., or the falling rate of profit, etc. I mean, please note, these were laws that he argued. He was talking about tendencies built into capitalism as a structure of relations, right? Etc. Okay. So mechanisms exist as the causal power of things. It is what enables structures, okay, to work, right? And they translate into. I mean, mechanisms are almost like causal powers. Causal power. They trigger the thing that something is. They trigger things, etc. And the way they trigger is also a tendency, right? So that's why the concept of tendencies cannot be separated from the concept of mechanisms, right? Okay. Now, in fact, Lawson, among others, has argued that mechanisms, the concept of mechanisms in social science, including economics, okay, refers to what he calls an arrangement of structures, powers, and relations, right? So when you're talking of, and in fact he uses the word ensemble, right? an ensemble, an arrangement of structures, powers and relations is what we call mechanisms. These are causal powers, okay, as it were, okay. In fact, a mechanism may have sub-mechanisms, like a bicycle, right, is a mechanism, right? A bicycle is a mechanism, okay. It also has a structure, but it is also a mechanism. But it also comprises sub-mechanisms, right? Such as wheels, okay, and with the wheels themselves have spokes, right? Those are sub-mechanisms and so on, right? I'm giving the example of a physical thing, but you can extend it to non-physical objects as well, right? But please note, this is part of the revitalized language of causality, because we are moving beyond the agent and trying to explore a wider language which perhaps explains things that agents do and also more, okay, etc. Okay, now mechanisms have tendencies. When we say a mechanism has a tendency, right? Okay, now you are talking about this ensemble of structures, powers and relations which enable something to do what it does, right? So instead of saying that mechanisms have tendency, it's actually the ensemble of structures, powers and relations which produce the mechanism which produces the tendency. That's why a tendency, now I'm slowly unraveling the further word, tendency, is a force. A tendency is akin to a force, right? And when we think about force, we think about something that pushes, something that propels, okay, something that acts, that puts pressure, something that pushes forward, and so on, okay. In fact, the term tendency refers to that force which is inherent in something, right, etc. Okay. Now, in fact, and I think I need to make this point. There are scholars, including Marxists, okay, who state that they operate with tendencies and not laws, right? That's why there are arguments about whether Marx was speaking about the laws of capitalism or was he speaking about tendencies within capitalism, right, etc. Okay. Now, there are some who say no, Marx thought in terms of laws rather than tendencies. There are some who say that, right? That's why, for instance, this is a point of agreement or disagreement that are there between and across Marxists and so on. Some are beginning to grow tired with this, so I need to now kind of wind up this axis. Okay, but then if you say, so if you think about laws in terms of tendencies, right, then somebody might say laws in terms of tendencies are more high-level generalizations, right? So a tendency and a law, the different law is a higher level generalization, right, etc. So there are agreements and disagreements about it, but I think the basic idea about tendency as a force, I think, is an important idea that can be retained. In fact, if you read Tony Lawson, in fact, he has a book called Economics and Reality. He actually looks at different connotations of the word tendency in economics, right? And actually does an extremely interesting discussion as well. No, and I think it's important for us, because most of us are not only researchers, we are also teachers, teaching the craft of each discipline that we represent. It's very important that we enable students to think with concepts. That's why I'm just investing on these conceptual words diverse. These are words, yes, but they are also concepts. Okay, and as concepts, they can be made to deliver a range of understandings and so on. Now, with this revitalized language of causality, I want to get to the question of explanatory critique, right? So I started with saying that explanatory critique requires that we revisit the language of cause, okay? In revisiting the language of cause, I posited a wider conceptual vocabulary through structures, powers, relations, tendencies, mechanisms, etc. Okay, and now I want to, with this background, of course somebody might say, no, are we still in the background? Why aren't we, getting to the core of the lecture or end of the lecture? I think we are coming to the end of the lecture, is that we need to get into, get some overlay of explanatory critique. Okay. Now I think it is important that if you want to do justice to the remarks that I have made and pack it with the question of explanatory critique, okay, then the first point that needs to be noted, okay, is that the subject matter of social science, okay, whether humanistically conceived or otherwise, social science, whether conceived within humanity-centered vision or otherwise, and I stress this, both, right, comprises, the subject matter of social science comprises both social objects, okay, both social objects, including beliefs, okay, including beliefs, emotions. In fact, I was at the break. I was having a conversation with one of you all about, whether emotion, what is the place of emotions in science, right, or in the scientific undertaking. In fact, you should. I think more than what social scientists have written about emotions, is wonderful to read psychologists on emotions. Okay, I've recently discovered the writings of this wonderful a psychologist who actually collaborated with an economist, got the Nobel Prize for it, in economics for that collaboration, Daniel Kahneman. And he has a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. That thinking can involve all those elements that the psychologist is able to discover. Is amazing, right? So that's why the subject matter of social science, just one minute, the subject matter of social science comprises both social objects, including beliefs, and beliefs about those objects, right? So please note, so beliefs may be part of the world. They are as much a part of the world as beliefs are statements about the world. Right? So beliefs, that's why emotion is not a perspective on the world. Emotion is part of the world itself. Yeah.
He said emotion is in a part of the world. I'm clarifying my doubt.
Yeah.
That is, I am emphasizing on the importance of objectively analyzing the emotional perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm...
No, but the point is here, what is the investment we bring to this word objectively understanding the world? So, and surely there is, in fact there are books on the history of, there are different understandings of objectivity which are possible. In the course that I teach with students, on this question of objectivity, I speak about fact-value holism, right? That facts and values are necessarily embedded in each other. So there is an influence of values on facts and facts on values, right? The bidirectional influence. Now, if you look at objectivity question through this fact-value holism, you get a different answer from the question of objectivity if you see that facts and values are separate, etc. So I think the question will get more clarity if we begin to speak about how do we see the distinction? Incidentally, if there are sociologists or social scientists, Max Weber has a wonderful discussion on objectivity in social science. Okay, he has and he makes a point that objectivity in social science means that you cannot take a value position. Right? He says that if you take a value position, you may study values, but you cannot say that this value is desirable or that value is bad. Right? Now, please note, he speaks about value. For him, objectivity in social science means value-free inquiry. Right? Okay. Now, why shouldn't I evaluate? Surely, what is wrong in saying that some values are more desirable than others? So, surely, what is the basis where we can reason about values? Right? According to Weber, you cannot have a scientific discussion about values. You can have a scientific discussion about facts. You cannot have a scientific discussion about values. And I'm arguing that, no, why can't we say that this value or that value is better than others? Incidentally, Taylor has an essay on multiculturalism, right? And in one of his remarks, he makes this point that that every society, every culture has a capacity to build itself, right? So all human beings have the capacity to create culture. But the fact is, some individuals, some cultures are able to create a culture which is much more robust. Right? So all of us begin with the same capacity, but we actualize our powers differently. And surely you can subject that to evaluation. Surely you can say that look, all cultures have the same capacity, but X culture came up with a better resolution, better understanding, and so on. That's why I think it will depend upon the question of what we mean by object. No, I don't think you and I are in disagreement about we need objectivity. We need to be objective, but there are different ways of being objective. If you think about objectivity within fact, separation between fact and value, you get one answer. But if you see fact and value as bidirectional influence, the facts inform values, values inform facts, then you get a different take on objectivity. And I think we should be able to discuss values. Right? In notions of objectivity, in fact, a lot of feminists have talked about standpoint theory. Right? What does standpoint theory say? Standpoint theory says that everything is from a standpoint, but there are some standpoints which wield better objective concepts. In fact, Harding uses the word strong objectivity. She uses the word strong objectivity as the favored scientific position for feminists. Right? That some positions on the world yield better understanding of the world than others. Now, I have discussed this in the context of the theory-experience debate in social science, which Gopal Guru and Sundar Sarukaya have forged, and so on. And there are other kinds of issues which are involved out there. But let me try to...
we will continue the discussion after.
We can try to show... No, but let me just wrap up this point about explanatory critique. Otherwise... I mean, you may say, no, it's all okay, but I think I will go with a sense of not having completed my lecture. So, and I am answerable as much to myself as to you and to the Kerala Higher Education Council, right? So you find that the subject matter of social science consists, okay, of both social objects and knowledge about those social objects or beliefs about those social objects, okay? That's why a crucial aspect of explanatory critique, in the way I'm looking at it, a crucial aspect is the connection, okay, between social ideas and social objects. ideas about those objects and social objects, okay? The social objects that produce those ideas, right? Ideas are not coming from anywhere. They're coming from somewhere. So what is the, one crucial element of explanatory critique is to see the connection between social ideas and social objects that produce these ideas and so on, okay? In fact, this connection between social objects and social ideas about those objects is often ignored, right? And I think one key element of explanatory critique and reinvesting in the language of causality is to bring the connection back between social objects and beliefs about those objects. Second, okay, is that explanatory critique, okay, what is explanatory about critique, right? What is this explanatory element of critique that one is talking about? And I want to point out that explanatory critique not only criticizes theories, not only criticizes other views, okay, it also identifies the inadequacies, okay, of other theories and explains why those inadequacies occur, right? Okay, that's why. What is the connection between social objects and false descriptions of those objects, right? When do we say that our social beliefs about those objects are false? How do we say that? In fact, the Marxian category of false consciousness is a very strong category. What right do you have to say that this consciousness is false, right? Etc. So what is the basis? That's why another crucial element of explanatory critique is not just pointing to the inadequacies of theories, but also pointing out what is it in them which is inadequate, right? Etc. And please note Marx's, I think you have to read Marx on Thesis on Feuerbach. I mean, just three pages to illustrate this point about what critique and the mandate of critique is. Of course, only we remember from Thesis on Feuerbach, we only remember philosophers only interpreted the world, the point is to change it, right? Etc. But I think surely there is something in this idea of explanatory critique. So in other words, social theory, okay, and social reality, okay, there is some causal interdependence, okay, between them, all right? This is another idea of explanatory critique. There is a relationship, a close connection between social theory and social reality, right? I mean, that social theory is practically conditioned by and has certain consequences, okay, in society, and therefore neutrality in social theory, however desirable it is impossible, right? Etc. Okay. So that's why we need. So you find that explanatory critique is in the grip of the evaluator, right? And I'm actually fond of this word. It's in the it addresses the evaluative dimension of social science. That social sciences are evaluative disciplines, right? Or are evaluative disciplines, right? Etc. So now being evaluative as part of explanatory critique also requires that social science, okay, study the social world in ways that addresses its complexity, right? So why did I invest on the language of causality? It was precisely to point out that the social world, okay, there is a structure and complexity to the social world, right? There is so it's not complexity which is chaotic, right? although there is some element of chaos built into the social world, but there is also some structure to it, and that's why it's important for explanatory critique to take this forward. Okay. Now, so explanatory critique, and this is my final claim. Okay, is also oriented towards arguing that social structures generate and distribute. Social structures generate and distribute. Upon agents, generate among agents and distribute among agents certain causal powers, right? So if you're talking of powers possessed, exercised, actualized, you can actually think about it in social terms. I gave you a physical example, but you can actually look at it in terms of certain positions that individual actors display. That's why Taylor's remark is important for us. Although the way of going beyond the agent in the way that I have recommended through this lecture may not quite be the way that Taylor recommends his exercises of going beyond. Because Taylor is still wedded to a hermeneutic social science, right? And surely somewhere along the way we need to sound the limits of hermeneutics or even of phenomenology for that matter. Okay, if you have to engage with some of these perspectives that come from the challenge of explanatory critique. With that, I think I will close, and if there are questions, we can take it on better and possibly, because I hurried through this conclusion, perhaps